Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Duvernay, and I'm the Associate University Librarian for Communications and Donor Relations at the ASU Library. On behalf of the entire ASU Library leadership team, I'd like to welcome all of you to our first Community Conversations event. As many of you know, the ASU Library spent many years reinventing the physical Hayden Library as a reflection of a newly imagined library for the new American university. At the core of the ASU Library is our commitment to ASU specifically, providing access to resources and services that fits the needs of ASU, not some generic academic institution. You'll see that in our emphasis on getting print and digital resources to Sun Devils wherever they are. And in fact, we had ASU affiliates log on to our resources from 178 countries last year. You'll also see it in community-focused and curated featured collections in our libraries, on the emphasis of our highly regarded community-driven archives initiative, and the inspiring and important work of the Labriola National American Indian Data Center. And recently, how excited we were and have been to welcome residents of the Mirabella retirement community to the ASU Library this semester. We are all truly connected. So we're excited about community conversations events. This is the first and what we are planning to be a series of signature virtual events to discover and learn about our library resources and our hidden treasures. And the key to this is conversations, actual real communication back and forth between real people based on your interests and our expertise. And as a result, we really do need to hear from you. So please be sure to respond to the post-event survey that you'll receive to let us know what area of the library you would like to explore. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our conversationalist for today. Suzy Morgan is the ASU Library's conservator, and she leads our preservation unit. Preservation unit is in charge of preservation, conservation, and reformatting services at the library. And Suzy is going to explain what all of that means to us. And talking with Suzy today is Logan Rhind, who is currently a development officer at the ASU Foundation, but today he's here as a community member and as an avid supporter of libraries. And I know he's excited to learn more about conservation and preservation. Suzy, Logan, welcome.
Hello. So like Jenny said, I am Suzy Morgan. I'm the conservator here in the Conservation Lab, which is where we are right now, which is in Hayden Library. And I did want to start off by sort of giving a little overview about what all those words mean, like what is conservation versus preservation, what's a conservator, et cetera. So I think the easiest way to probably understand what it is that we do here and what I do specifically as a conservator is that the goal of conservation is preservation, right? And conservation is the profession of conservators, right? So as a conservator, I have kind of a unique and highly technical skill set, which allows me to preserve cultural heritage physically. And there's a lot of ways that we can achieve this, and that includes direct intervention through what we call conservation treatment, but then also through more, administrative ways, which, might include making and developing policies, procedures, practices that help the institution and the users of collections know the proper way to handle or store or display cultural heritage. So really, I'm just I'm a member of one type of profession that is dedicated to preserving cultural heritage. And the way we do that is by, physical actions. And so sometimes those can also be preventive actions. So I'm doing things to prevent damage from happening, but also reactive actions which mean I may be working on something that has already been damaged and I'm trying to remediate that damage, right? So really in my day-to-day life, I have, there's all sorts of things I could be doing. I could be working here at my bench, actually, physically repairing books, because as part of my training as a book conservator, I am like a fully trained bookbinder. But then I might also be wandering around the library, just kind of keeping an eye on things, making sure there's no leaks, I don't see any bugs. Also, making sure the temperature of the building is good. And then, other days I might be at my computer, making spreadsheets to track what we have sent to our commercial bindery, or, looking at the history, the environmental data history of a certain storage location that we're considering to move a collection to. So it's a varied, there's a lot of different parts to being a conservator, and especially the head of a conservation lab. But that's reflective of what it is to be a conservator. Yeah, so again, just to recap, conservation is the profession of conservators like me, and our goal as conservators is the preservation of physical heritage, or the preservation of cultural heritage, which in my case is physical heritage because I don't work with digital things.
Suzy, I'm going to jump in here. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me today. I'd love to know a little bit more about the lab's history and when it was founded.
Right. So we, as a lab, we were founded basically in 1987, and I am the fifth conservator to be in charge of the lab since it started back then. And I actually have a really neat document that I found, which is the endowment kind of funding proposal from that era, where they have a list of all the different things they might want to buy for the lab. And the number one item on that list is microfilm equipment. I got to let you know, we don't have any microfilm equipment in the lab anymore. But yeah, so I'm the fifth person here running the lab, and but the bones of the preservation department or preservation activities have been here for a long time, because I also, a while ago, I discovered this conservation manual from 1979 that was made for ASU Library. And it's kind of fun to read because there are definitely some things in here that we wouldn't do these days. So yeah, and of course, even before that, there was a mending unit who did sort of, quick and dirty repairs of our circulating collection. And we've been sending things to a commercial bindery for a long time too. So, but the lab itself was born in 1987.
And since 1987, and maybe even beforehand with the work that's going on, are these efforts unique to our ASU library, or are there other labs like this at libraries in Arizona?
That's a really good question. So when I first started here, I kind of was like, we can't be the only one, right? And it turns out, yes, we are the only conservation lab in an academic library in the entire state of Arizona. So I don't think any of the other universities or colleges have a conservation lab as part of their library. There are some other conservation labs that work on different types of collections, like the ASU Art Museum has a lab. And I know University of Arizona, they have two labs, one for archaeological collections and then one for like photograph special collections. But in terms of, working with a library collection, part of which that circulates, we're it. So, and I think I would guess that there's probably not more than 50 professional conservators of any specialty in the state. So we're a pretty rare breed in Arizona.
And the physical lab you are in now in New Hayden Library, how does that compare to what your old lab was like?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, because I did want to point out that this is a new lab as of October 2019, I think. And so the old lab actually was just up one floor and back a ways, and it was not purpose built there were a lot of places in that lab where there were dead ends or like awkward corners or angles. And so this lab, I actually was very involved in the design of. And so it's very nice. It flows well. We have lots of space. And my favorite part is we have enough storage space for almost everything, which is like a dream for anyone in conservation. Like we never have enough room. So I'm sure we'll run out of room soon, but right now it's like I still have empty drawers. So it's a great feeling. Yeah, so the lab this is a new space. And also I love it because we actually have windows. Maybe Matt can turn the camera to show the windows right here where people can actually look at what we're doing in the lab purposefully. So it's a nice thing to look at between classes, and I think it helps kind of uh, brush away some of the mystery about what it is that we do. Um, and in the old lab, I think you might remember that we also had windows, but they were just because the lab happened to be on an external wall and there were windows there. So yeah.
I do remember the old lab. When I was a student in the early 2010s, I used to walk past the library a lot and look through and watch the work that was being done there. So now it's really nice that I have a much clearer view to see the incredible work happening there.
Yeah, it's I love watching. I like watching from the inside too. I like seeing people going by.
That's true. Yeah, it's actually clear for you now. Um,
Yep.
Now, I've been around ASU coming up on 9 years between being a student and a staff member, and I didn't know this lab existed. Can you share a little bit about why ASU students, faculty, and staff should know about this lab and kind of how that plays into their work here?
Right. So the the important thing to know about what I do and also the lab is that all of the collections in the library, the physical collections, are sort of our responsibility to preserve. So we don't just work on rare books or archival materials. We also deal with all of the circulating things. So we help kind of get certain types of brand new books ready for the shelf. If there might be loose bits that need to be tipped in or glued in before they can go and circulate. But also, it can be all sorts of things. So it's a lot. Our collection is very large here, and but what we help with is providing access to that collection, because really preservation is access. Because if something is broken or otherwise you cannot handle it in the way that's meant to be so that you can get the information from that object, then you can't access it. So what we do is help sort of return the ability of patrons, staff, student, faculty to use the things in our collections the way they need to be used in order to support their research or even just their, non-required reading.
That's a fantastic question we have here in the chat, actually. Um, what kind of assignments and from whom at ASU do you have to conserve or preserve?
Sorry, can you say again what kind of assignments?
Yeah, that's what assignments and from whom at ASU do you have to conserve or preserve? So are you getting maybe assigned things to preserve from other people at ASU?
Oh, I get it. So the lab really, we only work on collections that are owned by the library. So unfortunately, I can't provide, book repair services for things that don't belong to the library.
Okay.
But my work, it's kind of great actually, because I don't get assigned projects really. Partly because there's so much that I just know, it's like I have no shortage of identifying things that could be improved, or books that are sad and need some help. But really, kind of the regular flow of materials is triggered by patron use. So basically, if somebody returns a book after they've read it and the staff at the desk identify that it's damaged, then it will get routed to us. So that sort of, as things get used, then they may come to us for a little extra help before we go and put them back on the shelf. I also help provide guidance and also rehousing help and some basically general support too for the staff who are working on processing new archival collections. So not like brand new, like we didn't just buy it off Amazon, but like things that are new to the collection. So that I get work that way as people find things that were, as part of an archive collection. It's all folded or rolled up and it needs to be gently humidified and flattened. They send it to me. Yeah, so it stuff, comes into the lab from lots of different places and for lots of different reasons. But I always love to work on things that I know are getting used, because that, it's like, yeah, now somebody else can use it again, which is great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I see you have some books behind you on your desk. Do you have any interesting, maybe items you've worked on to highlight for us?
Yeah, right. So there's lots, and it's not off like I often get asked to like, what's the oldest thing or what's your favorite thing? And really, when a project goes well, it's like I don't really remember it because it was like that was easy, right? Put that one aside. So what I tend to remember are the challenges. And in this case, let's see, I've got a couple of things here where one of these, this is a book that I remember working on several years ago, and it's this beautiful publisher's binding. This is part of our circulating collection too. So if you want to read this, please check it out, take it home, just be nice to it. But it was literally covered with tape. Like you couldn't see the spine, the corners had this ugly tape on them. It was just covered. I spent hours removing the tape, scraping it off, and then also I totally took the book apart. I re-sewed it. I made a new spine for it, put it all back together, and I said, wow, that was great. Okay. And it was a lot of work. And then I found out there was a volume 2, also like in the same shape. So I then was like, oh, okay, I got to do this all over again. But I did. So now that both volumes are looking good again and sturdy. And yeah, so I remember like kind of that, oh, wow, that was a lot of work. Glad I don't have to do that for a little while again. And then I did. So, but then the other thing I like too is, and what I've done a lot of in the past, is making boxes for weirdly shaped things. Because we had a big project before the 2017 move to rehouse all of our artifact collection. And one of the things actually was this really cool set of dishes. I don't know if Matt can bring in the camera here. Where it's like the dishware from the Tempe Normal School cafeteria. And Tempe Normal School is like the original name of ASU. Or maybe it was Tempe. It's one of the really early names, right? So this is not the type of object I would treat as a conservator because I don't have the training to do that, but I certainly can make a box for it. So I spent a lot of time, and now like every little piece in here has a special, actually I can lift it up, and I have it so you can actually take out the individual items, and they have, it's got a nice little nest. And so you could shake this and it's not going to go anywhere. So it was kind of like a puzzle, right? Where you don't know what the picture on the box is. You have to create it yourself. So I've done a lot of housings for artifacts like that I've really enjoyed, because it really makes you think in sort of a 3D way. And then, then there's also other examples where, like, one thing I will never forget is the book where somebody used a banana peel as a bookmark. And that was one of those times where it was brought to me. I put it in a fume hood to just make sure the smell didn't escape. And then I sincerely was like, maybe I can help this book. Maybe there's something I can do for it. And really, I eventually just came to the terms with like, my training did not prepare me for this. And unfortunately, it was a book from our government documents collection. So we were able to kind of realize that, okay, even if we would draw this and, just say, sorry, buddy, it's gone, we would still be able to get access to either another copy of that same book. So it wasn't like a significant loss to that part of our collection, but I did hope that maybe I could figure out how to remove this banana, but it was very, very gross. Yeah.
Uh,
Oh.
One of the questions from our audience members says, do you only handle print materials? And I see obviously the boxing set behind you, but do you predominantly work with print, or are there other mediums you work with?
So as a conservator, some of our, as a profession, we have our own set of ethical guidelines and kind of a code that we follow. And part of that is that we don't work on materials or types of objects where we are not properly trained
Mhm.
to work on them. But as part of our training, also, we sort of get a good overview of how to, like how to keep things happy as they are, right? So either, what's the general best way to store certain types of materials? Because that's a type of action that for a lot of materials, they share the same needs, right?
Yeah.
So as for conservation treatment, where I may actually be repairing things, I really only work on books, paper-based materials, and I like to say I know just enough about photographs to be dangerous and know that I shouldn't do anything really fancy. Um, but then, I do, of course, advise on how to properly store many other types of materials. So we have everything from textiles, we have costumes, but also photographs, motion picture film, microfilm, lots of different things. So I still have to kind of know, okay, where's the best place to store this, or how to store it, or is this the right container for storing this object? Yeah, and then I did mention that I don't really do digital. So it's funny because when I started, the lab was still in charge of, reformatting like CDs
Mhm.
and floppy disks. Like there was actually a whole box of floppy disks when I started that, we were supposed to, preserve, like make sure they were kept safe. And I'm like, I don't know if that's really a good goal for the lab anymore because I don't think anyone has a 5.5-inch floppy drive in their dorm room these days. So much
Not
less
that I'm aware
or
of.
even a 3.5 incher. Um, so digital preservation though is an incredibly important part of library collections and archives also though, especially these days. But that's actually covered by a separate unit in the library. But we do, as reformatting is part of the preservation department, we have our reformatting project lead, Timothy Provenzano, who actually, he is the one who sort of helps us identify types of formats and collections that need to be transferred into a different format in order for them to either be preserved or even be accessed.
Okay.
So we do manage that, but I don't splice videotapes or mend costumes, but I can put lots of things in boxes and make sure they're happy.
That's wonderful. And, I know you're working on a lot of stuff each year, but roughly what kind of volume do you handle, maybe personally, and maybe what does the lab handle?
Oh, it's been, I haven't looked at my statistics sheet for a while. I would say several, I mean, right now we have like 2,000 things in the lab. But that's, that could be everything from like a very small photograph to a regular sized book. So I don't actually know how to answer that very well because it also it can differ a lot year to year because sometimes we may spend a lot more time doing more complex treatments on fewer things, right? And in other years we may do lots and lots of really quick things on just a whole bunch of books or something. So our numbers may go up or they may go down, but yeah, but I would say we're always busy. we're I never I never finish the pile. The pile just, I send a book out and two more come back in. So, yep.
You mentioned it a little bit, kind of the future of conservation and preservation work with us moving increasingly into a digital world. What do you think the future of conservation here looks like at the lab?
Right. So as I mentioned, there's been some changes even since when I started. We've dialed back certain types of actions or services that we would provide, particularly for circulating collections, just because it's not really that necessary because now it's a lot easier to provide alternate access to the text, right? And so but that's also becoming true of lots of things. not just circulating books, but also for rare book collections. So more and more I see the field as focusing on preserving, not like looking at preservation and conservation, not just with an eye for the text, like whatever we do, we got to make sure that somebody can pick this thing up and read it like a book. Um, but also, the artifactual value of the book, the materiality of the book. So even though, and it's funny because there's actually a book upstairs in special collections that, I mean, if you look at it, you're like, wow, that's really broken. But the interesting thing is, because of the way it's broken, you can actually see a lot about how it was made that you normally can't see. And the text, there might be a copy of it, or we could easily scan it and then just, be like, here, if you actually want to read the words, you can do that here. But, if I were to repair it in the way that I was, kind of the traditional training and, like, oh, it's broken, we'll fix it this way, then that actually would like hide that information about the structure. So we kind of, as a field, we've been thinking more and more about those sorts of choices, and how do we maybe reveal or preserve parts of the book and parts of objects that in the past weren't really identified as being a research priority, but now really are becoming more of a focus for research. Yeah.
I appreciate that very much. As a person with a history degree from ASU, focusing on the object itself and the history of that object, I think, is incredibly important. And like you said, that's a whole different subsect of information rather than just what's in the text.
Yeah. And the
Um,
other fun thing too that I've been doing lately is I've been looking through our circulating stacks and identifying things that have sort of like flown under the radar, but are really interesting as book objects, right? So they're sort of these bespoke um, or one-off bindings that were like the text, like you can read this book on Haughty Trust or the Internet Archive, right? But you can't read this book because nobody has a binding that's exactly like this of that particular text. So I've been identifying these, and the catalog record for like this book does not mention that it is in this kind of binding or that was bound by, Birdsall, that's the name of the binder. So I've been finding them and sort of like bringing them in from the cold and then noting down some of this information so that hopefully in the future we can add that to the records, but then also maybe put them in a more safe environment, such as our rare book collection.
Mhm.
So yeah, but again, it's like if you were just looking at these in the catalog, you'd be like, nah, like there's lots of copies of these texts, right? But there's not lots of copies of these books. So yeah.
And is it you that determines what can be circulated or what needs special storage and preservation?
I provide advice on that, but it's sort of it's a community kind of decision a lot of times between myself and our OpenStax team, who and OpenStax is the word we use for our circulating collections, but then also our rare books team, because just because something is old or even in a binding like that, it may not be like rare enough, or it like not everything needs to be in special collections all the time. But yeah, so there's definitely some things that we try and kind of, as we see them, we're like, oh, let's put that in special collections. But then there's other things that, you know, maybe they were in special collections for reasons that were not because they were rare. That were like, maybe we can let this back out into the wild, so maybe it'll get more use as a circulating book. Yeah, but a lot of things actually they can be pretty sturdy, and so I don't have a lot of anxiety about a lot of the stuff in our circulating collection, for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Uh, we have a question about the actual size of the staff of the lab. So, do you have any student workers or student assistants that work with you? And if so, how many?
I do. In fact, my student workers are what make my job possible, because they allow me to spend time on things that I otherwise wouldn't have time for because I would be doing their job. Um, so yeah, the lab has always had student workers as far as I understand. and usually we have about 2 to 3 at a time. When we were doing the move of the out of Hayden Library, where we were helping move all the special collections and archives out of Hayden into our off-site facility, I think I had a team of 13 student workers.
Oh,
But right now I have 2 who are in the lab regularly. Yeah, but then I had a staff person, another fellow conservator, also here in the lab, but she left about this time last year, for another job. So it's just been me, for all of 2020 almost. But yeah, so we don't have a lot of staff here, like in terms of full-time staff, but the student workers are definitely, I treasure them. They are really the backbone of the lab, and they help get like the daily grind done, and they kind of keep the lights on a lot of days.
and this is a more personal question for those students. What kind of majors and maybe what areas are they studying that kind of draw them to be working with you?
So when I hire students, I don't focus too much, like I don't focus on certain majors that often. What I'm looking for are things like having good hand skills. So can you do things with your hands, well? And that can translate into lots of different activities. We've had students here who are engineering majors, music majors. Of course, we get a lot of art majors, but also English majors. They just kind of span the gamut. But what I always what kind of connects them all, the successful ones, is that they have hobbies or other activities where they're using their hands a lot. So because we need them to be able to like use glue and not get it on the ceiling, or and be careful in handling things, and know how to use knives, and cut straight, and that kind of a thing. So but then also I look for students who have good decision making ideas, because really a lot of the work here is about making a bunch of different decisions where there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of if you there's a lot of ways things could go, and there's not always like a clear cut, like that's definitely the best decision. It's sort of you have to consider a lot of different things. So yeah, so that's, and of course they also learn some of those skills through their time working in the lab, and improve those. But yeah, I think that kind of answers that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Uh, Another question from the audience is asking more about the specific preservation activities you and the lab do on maps, like encapsulation, repair. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how map preservation is handled here?
Yeah, so maps kind of fall into the category of big flat paper things, and so we have lots of things in that category that aren't just maps, but and so they have a lot of similar needs, right? So and that includes stuff like architectural drawings too, and often what those types of objects suffer from is they get handled a lot, but also they're big and floppy, and so they're sort of prone to ripping or to getting little tears around the edge. But then also people tend to like to store them long term rolled up. So if they're coming into the collection sort of as a new to us thing, often they'll be rolled really tightly, and so we have to carefully humidify them, which is just kind of putting them into a damp enclosure for a while so that they relax, and then we can flatten them out and put them under weight and let them dry slowly, um, and then hopefully they'll stay flat. They don't always. And paper, paper kind of has a memory, so it likes to go back to what it was, the last shape it had for the longest time. So I've definitely like humidified and flattened things and been like, that was great, and then like a week later, you can just start to see them curling back up, and you're like, no. Um, yeah, so we do for that type of material, including maps. We'll do mends where they're needed, and then humidify and flatten things, and then also especially like with maps that may have been used in the field, they can get a little dirty. So we can also do some dry cleaning, which is not we're not taking it down to the street to get it pressed and starched, but um, you actually just gently cleaning off the dirt with something like a soft brush or eraser crumbs even, and so that, you do it very gently so you don't actually disturb the paper fibers. But that often can do a lot in making it look better and more readable. Yeah, so that's sort of what we do for big flat things.
Personally, and we have a question. How long have you been doing this, and how did you get into this line of work with preservation and conservation?
So I started in my program, which was the Kilgarland program, which was in the School of Information at the University of Texas at Austin. I started that program in 2006, and then I graduated in 2009. Um, but I remember like the first day of class, one of our professors, our paper conservator professor, looked us all as a group and said, "From this day forward, you are conservators, right? Like you are like this is day one is being a conservator. So you need to act like one. You need to like be careful like one." It just sort of made us think like this is real now. So we don't get to fool around. We're working with, real objects and, real cultural heritage. So we need to, be professionals. So 2006 was a while ago. And in 2009, I had my 10-year reunion with my cohort. That was in 2019. So 13 years, maybe 12 years. Yeah. So it's been a while, but yeah, and I've been at ASU for 7 years, right?
Yes.
But I've been making books for a long, long time. Like I remember making little journals and stuff in high school. I was just self-taught. I read some books and then I also had a few workshops. But yeah, so it's been a journey.
I know you mentioned that conservators tend to specialize in a specific area or type of conservation. What's your specialty?
So I would say I'm a library and archives conservator, but I would say I'm more comfortable as a book conservator. So I like working with books more than I do, regular flat things. Um, and, there's actually within book and paper conservation, there's people who really specialize more in like art on paper. So think like prints or drawings or, watercolors, that sort of a thing. I'm not as experienced with those type of materials just because the collections I've worked with and the internships I've had, they've focused on more of the book side of things. But paper based objects have a lot of commonalities in them. Um, but yeah, so I am really a book conservator, but I have the training of to know how to at least preserve, if not treat, a lot of the different types of materials you may find in a library or archive, right?
Yeah. And do you do training on this type of conservation efforts, or do you train on a variety of materials as well during that training sessions?
Oh, in my program, we really focused on books and paper-based things. So, archival documents, photographs. We got a little taste of, I want to say like kind of general AV stuff, like audiovisual material, not in repairing, but just like, hey, this is how you handle negatives. This is how you handle like, a 16 millimeter film reel, right? But I know there are other training programs, like I believe Winterthur and University of Buffalo, some of the other graduate programs, where you kind of do a cycle through a bunch of, so you may have like a unit where you work on ceramics, right? And then you do paintings the next month, and then you do fabric, and then you do paper. So it kind of depends on the program you go through. Unfortunately, the Kilgarland program doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, like you kind of, I think in those programs you get little tastes of everything, and then you kind of hone in on the specialty that you're interested in.
Very much like medical school, doing your rotations.
Yeah, there are definitely some similarities. Yeah, and really, like it would be hard for me to retrain into another discipline because or into another specialty. Some people are kind of a jack of all trade, but really, a lot of our training too is through internships and almost like sometimes like apprenticeships. That's sort of the older model, but also one that they have in other countries still. So a lot of my training is like just from working with another conservator, and getting that kind of rigorous experience doing the same thing over and over again, but in a supervised setting. So, like they're not going to give me anything that's above my skill level. And then eventually you go into a real lab, and then there's no safety net anymore, right? Which is where I am now.
Do you have a maybe favorite or most unusual item that you saved in your time as a conservator?
Oh, like I said before, it's hard for me to think of the items. I did an internship though in between my first and second year of school with the basically it was a survey, like a collection survey of a bunch of circus posters. And so I did a couple weeks at the Cincinnati Art Museum, and then some more time at actually the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, Florida. And we didn't do a lot. It was really just kind of looking at them and noting like, oh, it has a tear on the left corner, or oh, it's really faded, or it has tape here, or whatever. So I wasn't doing a lot of treatment, but they were some of the most interesting things I've ever looked at. Like some of the, and they're, the early 19th century circus posters, like just, there were all sorts of acts where it's like, I would love to watch like the guy who walks on his head down a flight of stairs, right? They're really silly, and of course probably a lot of it is kind of visual hyperbole. It probably didn't look as good as it did in the poster, in real life, but it was fantastic. And also they were huge. Like there were posters where they would like they were 8 feet long. They were huge, and so you couldn't even really see them as they were meant to be seen unless you were standing really far away. So yeah, that was a fun collection to work with. Yeah.
What about the oldest item you've worked on?
Uh, yeah, I don't often think about the age of things I'm working on. I definitely worked on books from like the 1600s, not a lot though. Definitely a lot of stuff from the 17 and 1800s, and of course, like I don't even notice like 19th century stuff, and 20th century. I was like, oh yeah, another one of those. So because there's just a lot of it. So yeah, I I can't think of like, oh, this is definitely the oldest. But yeah, the old books can be fun. But often like I get a little nervous around them too, because they tend to be really unique because they weren't produced in consistent ways. Like so a lot of times, the further you go back in bookbinding history, the more innovative people were. So they were just kind of like solving problems and nobody else had solved it yet. So they kind of came up with their own idea. And then meanwhile, somebody else, 500 miles away has the same problem and they solve it a slightly different way. So you really have to kind of think about you can't just be on autopilot for that sort of stuff. But it's always a little like sobering maybe, or a little, like it kind of puts you in your place to realize like, wow, this thing is like 300 years old. And I hope I'm not the last person to touch it that then ruins it for everyone else, right? Like it got here, it survived all the way to me. And I hope I can get it so that it keeps surviving and, somebody else can work on it later if they need to.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. The history major in me, I know that paper was made differently 200 years earlier and beyond. How does it differ saving and working on something with, more hand-laid paper than more chemically based paper?
Yeah, so the good thing about older paper is often there's still something you can do to save it. So for a lot of the books from this era, the 19th century publishers bindings, some of the paper was just really terrible, and there's a point where it gets too brittle, and that's the unfortunate thing is there's nothing we can do to unbrittle brittle paper. Like once it gets brittle, we can't fix that. The only way we can fix it really is by reformatting it, which again doesn't preserve the physical part of it, but it at least can preserve the text. So for that sort of material, it's always a little sad. Where it's like, wow, it looks really pretty on the outside, but the inside is like a potato chip. It's so crunchy. So, and I think like the tactile sensation of working on older paper is really nice too. It actually, the kind of the more like 19th century paper, when it gets a little acidic, it actually makes your hands itch. So I've come home from work some days when I've done a lot of work on like publishers bindings, and it's just like, ugh, like I really need the lotion. Um, yeah, but and older paper too, like it really can have a mind of its own, because in the bookbinding process, part of the some of the steps where you literally would beat the book with a hammer, right? You would beat it, to kind of get it to kind of lock into place. Um, and so, if you get it out of that shape, it can be kind of a struggle to get it back into that shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have time for our final two questions here. Um, so the first one is, at ASU, who or which department handles the conservation of film media?
So technically, that's me. It's us. But what we do for film and audiovisual material is we will send it to an outside expert. So if it's something that actually needs to be repaired, or something that we haven't reformatted yet, we do have some trusted vendors that we'll send them to, and then they'll do their work, and it will come back, and we'll be able to often, and really for all AV stuff, we reformat it, because we don't serve physical film based materials anymore. So we don't like fire up the projector with the two. Yeah, we will reformat it, and then you'll be able to view it that way. Because actually running that sort of material through a player, even a VHS deck, we won't use for archival tapes, because that could, I mean, I'm sure people of my age and older, you all, everybody has a memory where the tape deck ate the tape, right? Where, yeah, so that's always like, well, we don't want that to happen to this material that literally is the only copy of it. So yeah, so we outsource like the reformatting and any repair of AV materials to a trusted professional vendor.
Wonderful. And finally, do you have any practical tips for people who want to preserve their own books?
I do. So my tips are gonna sound really basic and simple, and you'll be like, "That's it." But really, this is the best advice I can give you: is do things now, so you won't have to worry about sending it to a conservator later, because preservation is cheap, but conservation is expensive. So what I always suggest to people is store things in a cool, dark, and dry area. So, if you feel comfortable in that space, then your book is going to feel comfortable in that space. So you don't want to be in your August, and you don't want to be in your attic in July, right? Or if you are in the Midwest or someplace colder than here, you don't want to be in your basement, right? When it's like flooding or cold in the winter. So keep it where you would feel comfortable, but then also keep things out of the light. So I get a lot of questions about, like, how is the best way to frame this unique archival document that I have that has a lot of family sentimental value. It's like, make a copy, frame the copy, store the original in a box somewhere safe, right? Because you can't undo light damage. You cannot, there's nothing you can do to reverse fading of ink. So yeah, so just, if you cannot frame the original and put it on the wall, I would recommend that. Like, frame the copy. But yeah, but there's, also putting things in boxes is a really good strategy. A box within a box is a great way to kind of maintain a stable environment, especially in places where you don't have the best kind of storage environment. Because having more layers around a thing slows that change in temperature and humidity. Um, yeah, and just, I would say, be careful. And oh, the one other thing too is, if you have photographs, make sure you write down what is happening in the photographs. Like, write down names, dates, while you still remember it, while your relatives remember it. And there's definitely some certain types of marking utensils that you should and shouldn't use on certain types of photographs. For the old photographs, where if you touch the back, it feels like paper. a pencil is good, like a soft pencil. But for the kind of more modern photographs, like if you would go to Walgreens today and you get it and it feels more plasticky, they make Micron makes good pens that are like that. Don't use Sharpies though, but you want to use a pigment-based pen, and you can get them on Amazon for fairly cheap. So if you just look for like pigment-based pen, that'll get you the right area. But yeah, so don't use ballpoint pen or Sharpie on any kind of photograph really. But that's sort of the thing is for a lot of our archival collections, we have a lot of mysteries because nobody wrote down like, oh, who's in this photo? Where was it taken? What's going on? And that's really that's that's information that you need to preserve in order to preserve the context of your heritage, right? So yeah, I guess those would be my tips. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been the victim of fading signatures as a athletics signature collector. So I've made that mistake too many times, and now everything is kind of under my bed and in a box preserved.
Yep.
And no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I actually looked on an autograph collector webpage because they did this. I found some page where they did like they tested out a bunch of pens. Like they're like, let's see what the best pen is for signing signatures, and it was actually directed at famous people. Like, use the right pen when you sign your signatures, right? And it was great because it was sort of like, hey, you just kind of did a little bit of preservation research in a way that now I don't have to do.
That's awesome. And I know we're coming up to our time here, so I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Jenny.
Well, thank you so much, Logan and Suzy. I really appreciate actually that last question that Chad gave because I think it was great for all of us to have that practical advice for preserving our own collections. And so thank you so much. I also want to put a little plug when the next time people are able to visit Hayden Library, please go by Suzy's conservation lab. It is on the renovated concourse level where near a lot of the classrooms, and you can see any number of interesting things happening. And we're really glad that Suzy and her students are so open to being gawked at by, by people who are walking by. So on behalf of the ASU Library, I'd again like to extend a really big thank you to both Suzy Morgan and Logan Rhind for bringing your energy, enthusiasm, and expertise to today's community conversation. I also like to thank all of the participants today, the attendees. Thank you so much for spending this time with us this afternoon. You absolutely will be receiving a post-event survey, and we'd love for you to take a moment to fill it out and let us know what other areas of the ASU Library you'd like to learn more about for future conversations. Thank you all, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.